Hey folks, Keep It Wausome podcast coming at you. I have Tammy Stezenski, a former owner and founder of City Pages and my former boss. So how's it going, Tammy?
Hi, good. How have you been?
Good, good. How have you been?
Surprisingly busy. Now that I've left, I have so many things to do around the house. Honestly, I'm full-time handyman now.
Oh, nice.
For a while.
Well,
For a while.
well, if you want to bring your tool belt over, you're always welcome.
Oh, anytime. I think I told you that. How's the
Yeah,
bathroom coming?
yeah, we'll leave that for another.
That's a separate podcast.
I've made progress, but it hasn't been very quick. And so now how long has it been since you stepped down?
Well, we sold City Pages at the end of January, 1st of February of
Yeah.
this year, 2020. And then I stayed on to help the new owners with the transition. And that was supposed to be at least a minimum of a year, maybe longer, maybe into
Yeah.
perpetuity. But then the pandemic hit and advertising revenues plummeted for City Pages, for
Yeah.
newspapers, media like City Pages, that really made covering arts and entertainment and community events a big part of their coverage. All that went away, so a big part of our coverage went away. So like a lot of other businesses, we're suffering from just, I want to say a lockdown, because there's not a lockdown anymore, even though there was, but from just the downturn and people hunkering down and isolating, and now people getting sick. So anyways, so that was in June, and so then in June they said, and I knew obviously that things were bad, and they said, it's just so, it would be so hard to afford to keep you. And I said, I know that's okay. We'd sort of planned that I would leave in January, but instead I'll go in July. I don't know, January, July, would be better to have a little time off.
Yeah.
So that was fine. So it's been since July.
Yeah, so and I do want to dig into the founding of City Pages, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But I just want to ask, what's that time off been like?
Well, like I said, surprisingly busy. Well, first I had to finish getting all the business stuff, the old business stuff out. You saw me hauling things out, boxes, business records that are still in my dining room, and so it was the first week or two was pretty crazy with being busy. But I did take quite a bit of time off in August. Brian, you know how August is around City Pages every year, because we're putting our Get With The program out. I have not seen August for over 20 years. I got to see August. So that was nice. So we went on a couple of road trips with the family, where we could. So I had a really, really nice, relaxing, eventful August. I'll say that. Before I started digging into things that I had to do.
Well, it's more than 25 years of running City Pages. I mean, you definitely deserve to see an August finally. So that's awesome.
Yeah, towards the end, I couldn't even see I couldn't even get down to the Blues Fest. So
right. So let's go back to So this is I'm gonna look at my shirt for reference. I think it was 1993, right?
City Pages started in 1993.
1993. So you have this idea. Where does the idea come from? You were working at the Daily Herald at the time, I believe.
So the founding story, and I'm sorry, you had told me that we had never had that discussion, and I'm sorry, maybe I don't know if it just never came up, or maybe I've told the story so many times I don't want to feel like I'm repeating myself.
Yeah, probably not on the level that we're going to have it today. Like, I really want to dig into this because I find it super fascinating. Like, when you think back, like the Daily Herald at the time was still it was a pretty strong paper,
Right. So this was.
I'm sorry, even when I worked there, I mean, it was still. I remember when I job shadowed, and I must have met 8 or 9 reporters.
Oh my gosh, the news. So I'll go back to even just a little bit before I started City Pages. So out of college, I graduated from UW-Madison. My my first job was at the Daily Herald as a reporter. And now I grew up in Shawano, which is an hour east of Wausau. So Wausau, we didn't come to Wausau that much, but it was still always considered, the bigger city. So, but I wasn't really that familiar at all with the town. So I got a job here, and what I discovered was that Wausau was surprisingly fun and energetic, and it was hip. Even then, it had a really nice downtown. You had these old, beautiful buildings, which now, since they built the square, you can see a lot better.
Yeah.
And they were the people who were here were so invested and so loved the community. And there were these little pockets that I discovered of really hip, cool things. You had the Scott Street Pub and some other bars that were doing live music. You had musicians who were doing live jams all the time. The Grand Theater had a very impressive performing arts season. And back then, this was, would have been, say, 91, 92. It was small, and maybe about, I would say, even less than half of what their season is now. But still, they were getting national acts, and they were doing things like showing artsy movies that wouldn't play at the movie theaters, but they would play them at the Grand. And when I mean artsy, I mean actual arts and independent movies, not the from decades ago what people would call art movie. Because Grand Theater had that too 100 years ago. And then the other reporters that I bet now at that time, as you said, the Daily Herald, that it was a big newsroom, and it was full of journalists, reporters and editors. I bet there were over 20 at the time. I mean, wow. Yeah, because education, I'm visualizing what that newsroom looked like and just counting, but definitely there were over 20 reporters and editors at that time. Now that's just crazy to think about. What's there is no newsroom now here for the Daily Herald. Thinking that.
How long did you work there before you made this decision? By the way.
Not that long.
Sounds like maybe a couple of years, huh?
Only a couple of years, yeah.
What did you cover? What was your assignment?
Because 1990 was it 1990 when I first came up, and then I left for a little while to travel abroad, and then I came back. So 90. So yeah, really less than 3 years. I was there less than 3 years. I always say I was 25 years old. I was young and I didn't know any better about starting a business.
That's a good point. Yeah. So what beat did you cover?
Well, at first I was up in Merrill.
Oh, okay.
And then I did government. Then I pretty much did everything actually, but government. I did city, county, municipalities, and then every once in a while I would do schools. Everybody had to do cop and court speak, because when things happen, they happen.
Sure.
As you know, you work for the daily newspaper too. So I did pretty much everything. But what I did notice, and what a friend of mine who was working there, who I met there, also noticed is what the newspaper then and the TV and radio, what the media weren't covering was the culture and the entertainment. Now, every once in a while they'd have some story, but it was never part of the regular coverage. You couldn't look to the media to find out what band was playing somewhere. They just, that was something that just wasn't covered. You could hardly find, some of the big community events were covered, but there wasn't really a good calendar of events.
And it wasn't like there was Facebook events or something you could go look up on,
Right, exactly. This was before. Well, it's right that you started the internet, but it was before social media, and before it was easy for people to do that.
Yeah, it's like maybe a flyer on a light pole or something. That's about it.
Right, exactly. And people still put flyers on the light pole. So, so as a, as a 20, then 20, 23, 24 year old, and also being a big fan of the Isthmus, the alt weekly newspaper in Madison. I just saw this big gap. I just thought, why doesn't Wausau have a newspaper like the Isthmus? There's stuff covering. There's stuff to cover. There's things happening. So as the story goes, one of my regular hangouts was the Scott Street Pub, which is now gone. The Scott Street Pub to hear live music and hang out. Was one of those wonderful places where you had, you had your old hippies, your new hippies, your young people. You had then businessmen and lawyers. It's like every aspect of Wausau, every single strata came together.
Yeah, rest in peace, Scott Street Steak and Pub.
Exactly. So when we were one day, a friend of mine and I, who was also a reporter there, we were at the Scott Street Pub, and it was getting late at night after several beers, and it was literally, you know what? We could start our own newspaper. Hell yeah. And then before you knew it, we were writing up business plans. And so it really did start as drunk talk at a bar.
Nice.
Yeah, it did.
And
but I suppose, like I said, it was, when sometimes these things happen because you're too young to know better, and you've got just a lot of courage. The French say, when you drink, that you have courage. It gives you courage. Yeah. So apparently that's what happened.
Yeah. And then what happened from there? So you start drawing up business plans. You still are working at the Herald. How do you make that transition? Like
very quietly.
Yeah.
Very quietly. So we just, picked a few professions. Now I wouldn't say I had a business background. It was more that I was always around business type. I grew up on a farm, and a farm is a business.
Yeah.
And then I worked my way through college at a startup pizza restaurant, and I was one of their first employees, and I helped them do payroll, as well as slinging a bunch of pizzas, all the time. But, doing the money, helping them with their profit, helping them just helping them be profitable. So anyways, I had just that. It just was always in the background. So a lot of those things were not just the basic business things were not new to me. But I knew that we had to get a real good business plan. We didn't think that we needed that much money to start up. This was just the very start of desktop publishing. But we got, so this would be in 1992. We got an accountant, an attorney. We got media experts locally and nationally. We talked to some key people, some key advertisers, just saying, hey, what do you think of this? Because even though the Herald was going strong, there was still this lingering resentment, because only 5 years prior, maybe 5 or something like that, 5 to 8 years prior, the Gannett had bought the Daily Herald from its local owners, who had it for, I don't know how many years the local owners had it. But so there was this feeling of, big corporate takeover of the the media. So there was that lingering resentment that Wausau didn't have its own, its own newspaper, its own media. So out in the business world, in the advertising world, and then also for readers, there was a very much of an openness to it, and people were really excited to have something homegrown. So that made us confident that we could make it work and be profitable, because we're like, we don't need that much money to live on. We just have to get a couple computers, and so we had a really, really, really good business plan, especially for for 24, my partner at the time, she's a year older. So for basically two 25-year-olds, we had really good business plan.
What was the stretch of time between the drunken conversation at Scott Street Steak and Pub and like the first,
very fast,
when you actually pulled the trigger? Really fast?
Really, yeah, really fast.
Like a few months?
Probably a matter of a couple months. Now we had to do we had to do some planning, and then once we knew we were going to do it, then there just had to be like the setup. So the first issue of City Pages came out April 1st, 1993. So we had a perfect tagline, it ain't no joke, and that's why City Pages has always done a special anniversary issue. So it was probably late 92 that we got kind of everything nailed down, and then early January, February probably is about when we got office space lined up. We knew what we had to buy. Did I ever tell you the story about our experience at the bank?
A little bit, but let's get into that.
Let's get into. Do you want to hear that now?
Yeah. Well, before we get to that, so was there like a period of, so you're starting to reach out to advertisers? Was there a period where you were a little concerned that the Daily Herald would get wind of this?
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, really, we only talked to a handful of people who we trusted, and we told them that, but word was trickling out, because when I put in my formal notice that I was quitting, I remember the HR person, Betty Donovan. I don't know if Betty was still there. She said, so she had a little smirk on her face. So, are you starting another newspaper? And I said, well, I don't know. I didn't want to lie.
Yeah.
But I said, well, I don't know. Where did you hear that? Oh, people are talking. I said, that's interesting. So I tried not to. But I could just tell on her face that the word had gotten out. But it was connect, and I'm sure they were more. Well, by this point, my partner had left the paper to take a different job. But I'm sure at this point, they were really more kind of just bothered by losing a reporter than like any sort of competition.
Well, I imagine if that were to happen today, there'd be no one local to even find out about it. You'd probably your exit interview probably would have been over Zoom from someone in Bangladesh or something.
In Bangladesh. Exactly. And they'd say, and you were from Wausau?
Wausau, yeah.
Right. It's amazing how nothing's local for them.
So tell me about the bank experience.
Okay, so we didn't need, like I said, we were starting up on a shoestring, hardly any money, but we knew that we need a little bit of working capital, to just float us until when we thought we could actually make some money.
Do you remember how much it was?
It was like it was probably 20. I mean, it was not that much. It was maybe 20, maybe 30. It might have even been 15. I mean, it was very, very, very low. Very, very low. So we went. We had all the business plans. They were nicely presented. It was really professional. I mean, we knew for at the time. For two young people, I mean, we had all of our ducks in a row. We had a good plan, good backing, and the banker, the banker was basically like a 60-year-old white guy who looked at us, and this was 1992, 1993, and who would have thought? So he brought us in, and then first of all, I'll tell you, he never opened the business plans, never opened our documents, never, not once. He even to look at it, he just said he kind of did the, so what is this about? Kind of thing. And then very quickly he separated us, my business partner, who was a woman too. He separated us for some reason. And then he said the things that he asked me were hardly at all about the business or the business plan or anything. He just said, well, what does your husband think about this? When I said, well, obviously, because he at least knew the basics, of our business things, because from the loan application,
Yeah.
and he said, what does your husband, is he okay? Is he okay with this? And I said, well, of course, I mean, his name is there. You've got, you've got his name too. And he said, oh, well, what's going to happen when you have kids? And I said, well, I don't plan on having any kids, but like guest daycare. And then he said, there are so many of these things. You just have two girls who come in, like two waitresses, and they think they know how to run a restaurant. What? It's just going to fail. And very, very sexist things. Like I said, he didn't ask any questions about the business or the business plan, revenues, expenses, extraordinary things that might be different. So then he talked to my partner, Mary Jo Cooley, and of course I didn't hear what happened. And then he pretty much just shooed us away. And on the car ride home, we were like, well, that was weird. And it turns out what he said to her said, well, don't you ever want to get married? And she's like, well, I didn't, maybe someday. And he said, well, how are you going to find a husband if you are doing this? And it was so patronizing.
It's so weird.
It was so weird. It was so weird. Well, imagine if you think about it, this was 1993. Let's just say he was 60 years old. So that means he was born in the 30s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe even late 20s. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, even at this time, though, there were laws that said you can't discriminate against women for things like this. So, and really, we weren't asking for that much, and we had collateral. I mean, I had at that time I had a house that that was still worth. It's not that it was paid off or anything, but it's still, we weren't asking that much. And my partner had a house and other things. So so then there are laws that even back then there were laws that they couldn't discriminate. So basically then it was a yes, but outrageous interest. It was like quadruple cat collateral because it was double on both of us. So let's just say it was $10,000. That means I had to secure it with 20,000, and Mary Jo had to secure it with 20,000, which would be equal, So it just outrageous terms, which my banker friend today says, oh, that's a yes, but no. Right. And they really did, right. That was yes, we have to say yes, but it's actually no. And then we found and that was outrageous. And then we found another a bank who looked at it, and that banker was very excited about it. And he said, "Wow, you've got your stuff in a row, your ducks in a row. Let's see what we can do." And then it happened. And you know what? I banked with them ever since.
Yeah, sounds like he actually read the business plan then.
He did, and he was a fan of City Pages, and he was so proud because even to this day, if I bumped into him, he'll give me a hug, and he always would. Yeah, it would, because for him, I mean, let's face it, it was going out on a limb a little bit, but really any bank, they would see that it would have been secured. It wasn't even that much. But it still, it still would have been, a high, I understand that totally. It would have been a high risk. But so then when it turned out to be successful, then that the banker at People's State Banks was always so proud, that he's the one who had faith in us, and it turned out great.
Did you ever pull a Julia Roberts on the other guy, on the other banker, wave in front of him a little bit?
No, I think he retired not too soon after that, because word did get out, and honestly, I can't even remember what his name was, but I'd heard that it didn't reflect all that well.
Yeah, I bet. So tell me about the first issue. Like, what was it like putting it together? What, how did you plan it? How was it received? All that kind of stuff.
Well, at that time, the very first issue was, oh, I've got it here somewhere, actually. The very first issue was a picture of the then mayor, John Hess, going, like crossing his fingers like this. And he was game. And we told him that we wanted a newspaper that covered serious issues, did in-depth magazine type stories, but also to be fun and energetic. So he was game. So we had him the front going like this, because it was this was the very first. It was called Wausau Century. This was the very first public-private partnership to develop that waterfront, which the riverfront near downtown, which, as we know right now, was really good. It was a good idea to do that. This was it was going to be a civic center, so public-private. And there were. And it failed. It failed eventually, even though people tried to bring it up in different incarnations. But it failed. But this was a years-long process. And when City Pages was coming out, it's when things were just starting to really take off, and they were trying to get the public behind it, and the plans and the agreements were coming together. So that was a perfect cover story. And we just the headline was Wausau Century in this century. So it was the perfect way to, because even though, of course, the media all covered it, no one had done like a real kind of in-depth magazine-y, type of story that we wanted to do. So we thought this was the perfect topic, the perfect story to showcase the type of story that we wanted to do. And so those very first issues, we had in our heads, well before the publication date of April 1st, what we were going to line up for the stories. We thought these are topics. And because I'd been a reporter and I covered so many different things, I knew a lot of people in town. I knew, well, as I always told you as a reporter, you should always know far more than you could possibly write every week, right? To have more stories than you know what to do with, more stories than time. So that's the way I had this whole bank of stories built up that we really could just feed in. These are ongoing issues that weren't getting as much coverage, and there was very, very easy for us to bring a whole light into these just by giving it more of that in-depth historical context and talking to more people. It just was a type of journalism that wasn't here, hadn't been here.
Yeah, and I think still, even to this day, I don't know anyone's really doing that kind of long form journalism other than City Pages. I guess me.
Which of you?
Was it just the two of you at this point, or did you have other?
Yeah, we had some freelancers, and we had some freelancers lined up too. And then we also had I think we had someone on the business side too, advertising sales. So in the beginning, we had to do a lot of it was mostly me doing the advertising, the sales, and then my partner did a lot of almost all of the design, the graphic design. So
that's kind of a weird position to be in, being a reporter, but also doing sales.
Yeah, but what? That's something that it's a small. We had a small office, and I was doing that constantly. And in some ways, I always said it almost was easier because I didn't have to. There wasn't that fight between like advertising and news. It was just something that I had to resolve, and and I always knew that that the integrity of City Pages, and that people could trust it. We weren't going to that we were going to report on something that deserved to be reported, and not be held by our advertisers for any reason. That was way more important to the longevity and the sustainability, because that's what any media has, is its integrity in that. And so those conflicts hardly ever came up anyways. Oh, and if they did, it was more of a, oh, we got to cover this. But of course,
Yeah.
that in a small town, you run across that, even if it's not a monetary thing, it's a friendship thing. Like, you've got to cover someone who you've become very friendly, you like them a lot, and then you have to do something that's not going to reflect well on them. And you just, my attitude, and I've always said that is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So
Yeah.
right. So, right. Just be sensitive to their feelings, saying, well, I mean, not in your writing, not to compromise your writing, but in how you approach them.
Right. And I think too, always being fair is usually, as long as you're fair, people will usually get over it.
Right.
If they feel you've been unfair to them, you didn't give them their chance to say their piece, then people, won't like that as much, or you might have some trouble with them. But, I've had, it's just inevitable as a journalist that sources are going to get mad at you at some point. Like, it's just the part of the way the game goes. But I've never had anyone stay mad long term, except for one, but he went to jail. So
well, I always said that in my early days, the best relationships I had with sources were the ones I had fights with. So, I mean, there were two people in particular this is when I was still at the Herald. I had shouting matches with them.
Oh, really?
Well, they for a reason, because I was reporting on something that they really didn't want to make public yet, but it still was in the public. So it was, so shouting. I remember one time I was on the phone with one of these sources, and I'm kind of a loud talker anyways. It's, from coming from a Polish family, we're just loud. And so I guess I was shouting, because then when I hung up with them, I looked around and the entire newsroom was dead silent, and they were all looking at me. And then a couple of people applauded. But nothing mean was said. It just got heated. But that person ended up being very friendly with me, and we had a great relationship, because in the end, what I wrote was, like you said, it was completely fair, and it was accurate, and I think he knew that it needed to be. It basically, that story was about Wausau was trying to do its first homeless shelter, or homeless thing, and that was very touchy at the time, because nobody wanted anything like that in their neighborhood,
not in my backyard,
or in their area. Not in my backyard. They didn't want it near downtown or any business. And so, but they knew, the city people knew that Wausau needed something like that. And so they were doing moves to get this started. Well, I heard about it and reported, and I was reporting on it, and he didn't want to make it public. So, or they wanted to do it on their own time, on their own timeline. Which, I mean, the point is, if you do that on your own timeline, then people can't, right? Then people don't know about it, then it's too late. So, so right. So even though, I mean, his intentions were good, I mean, he was trying to get a homeless shelter, some facility up and going, because people really, really needed it. And he was trying to keep it quiet, so that they could get it done without a whole lot of hullabaloo. But this was a city project, so.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah.
So what was that first year like financially? Like, was it a struggle?
Oh my God, we lost money. We didn't make money. City Pages didn't make money for a couple of years. So we lived, hardly without a salary. Very, very, very small. Just doing, not really buying anything, just living, running the business from a shoestring. But revenues were going up. So it was, and it was going. And in fact, one of the things that happened, it's every new business has this. It's growing pains. It's if you do well enough that you're so busy, at some point, even if you're not making a lot of money, you have to invest more money so you can get to that, so you can get to the next level because you've maxed out your capacity, either in staff or space or, or whatever. And so we ran into that multiple times, actually, and then having to move to a more expensive location, and then having to add more staff because there are only so many hours in the day. I mean, we were those first couple of years, crazy hours, like, every single day for like 12, 14 hours.
Wow. And what was that? I mean, were you just kind of like pulling out your hair? Were you having fun with it too? Was it nerve-wracking?
It was fun. It was fun. We would have like on Wednesdays, we would have volunteers come and, proofread, and we all, we get a 6-pack of beer or something. We proofread, and we draw and have fun. We'd say it's like a pizza, beer, and proofreading.
Nice.
Which you might think, as long as you get the proofreading done before you have more than,
Yeah. At some point you must have ended that practice because I don't recall that happening at.
Well, that's when we had volunteers. Those are volunteer proofreaders.
I was getting paid, so I didn't get any pizza.
No.
I get it.
And then plus then it was much busier. I mean, these were, back in the days in the paper, it was very thin. We didn't have that many articles. We didn't, and it was a little bit like the pandemic papers, right?
Right.
And also at this point we weren't doing a whole lot of like, what you would call like the things that you would normally do is cover like all the, as many meetings as you can, to keep up on the regular stuff. We knew that we couldn't do that as well all the time. So, and we always told people City Pages is not, and into this day, City Pages is not a daily newspaper.
Right.
It's not a daily. So we're going to cover things differently. We might not always cover like the breaking things, the big things that come up, obviously like elections or things like that. We will cover it in a timely manner. And that basically that worked from day one to now, because you just have to, because when you come out once a week, and that's what you're committed to, you just cover. It's like I said, it's like a magazine.
Yeah, it is, and I think there's a value to that. I think readers like having sort of everything sort of all in one place. Like here's all the news of the week. I can read it and I can go about my day. I think that's always been the value for City Pages, and that's what I liked about it before. Even I was a journalist. Just having that once a week. Oh, here it all is in one spot, and here's all the entertainment for the week. Here's all the news that happened.
Yeah, we might not have we won't have like the car crashes or the big accident unless it was a very terrible big accident,
Yeah.
But those things.
I think there's a certain demographic that really likes that stuff, but I think most people probably can do without that, unless it's like.
And they can get it somewhere, and they could get that someplace else too.
Mm-hmm.
So
you can't cater to everybody. You have to cater to like you have to find out what your niche is, I think, and
find your mission. And then, if you're going to do it, like I always say, if you're going to do something, you do it well. And so then, and now that doesn't mean that it will never change, but when you make a decision, you decide what path you're going to take, what your product is going to be, then you got to commit. Then you have to commit to it and do it and do it well. And I think if you know that helps make some decisions, because, and sometimes it takes a while for reporters. I mean, you probably remember early on, you weren't really sure, is this a type of thing? How do we cover it? But you also sort of knew definitely what, we didn't have to pay attention to. So it's always good to think that way. And, and always I said, sometimes it's a matter of, you can cover kind of the same topic, but just try to have that little something extra, because people might not read it for a couple of days.
Right.
So you want to give them something different and new, either different spin, a different way to look at something with a different source, who maybe is going to say something different. So.
Yeah, I always hated covering car crashes and fires anyway, so I never minded that. I was happy about that. Well, I wanted to ask you, and this segues perfectly to this too, because when you start a business, you have a vision for it. You have a mindset of like what it's going to look like, and in the beginning, you're doing a lot of it. At some point, like you said, you start growing to the point where you can't do it all yourself anymore, and you have to bring in help. And I know you had a very strong vision for it, and you had very strong opinions on what things should look like and how it should work. What was that like, bringing in new people and having to give up a little bit of that control, or putting things into delegating and putting things into other people's hands? What was that like for you, and how did you adapt to that?
Well, it all kind of goes back to there are only so many hours in the day, right? And so you have to, and people, especially when you know you run out of time to do something well. So it's actually very gratifying when you delegate those things. Then you see it being whatever task it is or project, you see it being done better, and it can be expanded on, and you're doing more things than you possibly could. It's I think as long as people understood the kind of the basics, the way that I always said that I wasn't really a good manager because I just expected people to do a really good job and figure things out and how it fit, and if they didn't know, to just ask. It was sort of a sink or swim, kind of attitude. But first of all, it was managing people also takes time, and I didn't necessarily have that time to do it, because I still was doing so many hands-on things. So I don't know if that was the best way, to do it. But on the other hand, I don't know if I had any choice in the matter of, not having that much time to manage, or the resources to. So it's just, and it's very, it's really satisfying too, and heartwarming is when you see employees when they start there and then they move on and they move up to other things. It's really, that's why I've always told people, who work for me, it's like, don't feel bad if you are looking for another job, or if you want to move on. That's just part of business. And if you do something, because of what you've done here and what you've learned and the contacts you've made here, and you go on to something bigger and better, that will pay you more. That's fine. That's fine. I actually love seeing that. Now, it maybe will cause a bunch of hardship for a couple of weeks until we can find the replacement. But that just, you can't get around that. I mean, so seeing people grow, and even seeing people grow in their jobs, especially you would really see that in graphic designers when they first would come in, and they had a hard time, because not only is newspaper design different than most anything anyone's ever done, but also our design was very different. I mean, to give them the freedom to do some fun things, but also you have to kind of keep it together. Also know the limitations of newsprint and your space. Also remembering that actually graphic design can get you into trouble libel-wise. I mean, it is, that it's information, and that you could have, for example, if you have the wrong design or photo with the wrong words, it's completely inaccurate, and damaging it. So all those things. So it really, that's where you would see the difference in people, because they would produce something. So you'd see these great covers, magazine covers, or or weekly, newspaper covers, or that's where you would see really the big difference. Or them even, and you've seen this too. I just love it when graphic designers would catch like typos or something edity-ish. They would think like an editor, and they'd catch it. Like, I'm so glad you did that. That was so. I just loved seeing that, and Eric and Ben and and Alex, that just
Alex really grew in her time at City Pages, I think.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, such beautiful work, really. And applying that really that aesthetically pleasing, beautiful thing to like the tone and the stuff, because especially, it's not just Alec, all graphic designers have to learn that their design isn't just something about being attractive. It conveys information. It
Right.
conveys emotion. It conveys a tone.
Mhm.
So, and sometimes, just like with writers, sometimes you can have an accidental wrong tone. You didn't mean it,
Sure.
but you just use, maybe a wrong word choice. For graphic designers, might be maybe a certain color or a certain typeface or something like that that just conveys a different tone than you're really wanting to get. And that's why everybody needs an editor. I always said even graphic designers need an editor. I always told you that too. And look at the covers, with an editor's eye, because they have to be edited too.
Yeah,
They're,
for sure.
you know.
When so you said you guys were kind of losing money in the first couple of years. How did you turn the corner, and was it just a slow, gradual as revenue just slowly increased over time until it made
Revenue just was going up. It was finding it was really about finding that point where you're making enough of a profit to be like, and you're at a staffing level that's sustainable. So for example, like if we were making a decent profit, but the 4 people working there could never go on vacation, were working overtime, were killing themselves. That's not sustainable.
right?
So you had to get to that point where I'm just, doing analogies. So where maybe those 4 or 5 people could work at a realistic, level, and
Was that kind of the
that was, it would kind of go like this.
Yeah.
Can you see, so you would go up and you're making some money, but it wasn't sustainable. So then it would go back down because you got maybe more office space or another computer, or you had to change printers, or your printing was more expensive because you were doing more pages, right? So kind of, the profits would sort of go like, but we never really made money for, oh gosh, it was a long time. It's a long time. And we are, for the longest time, I didn't take a salary. I really didn't get paid. I was first, for many years, I hardly paid myself at all. And then for many years after that, I was like the lowest paid,
Really?
So, I always say you're making more money than, well, I mean, I didn't try to telegraph that because I wasn't trying to make anyone feel guilty.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it was, so, we refinanced our house a couple times, to help float it along. But, I believed in it. And of course it was just trending, the revenues and the growth and circulation, it was just all trending in the right direction. We just had to get to that point where we could make money. And, the thing with media and, with the newspaper is how I would always say we're a factory. We're an information news factory, right? And there's only so much that that you can do, and you can't really cut corners, because if you cut corners, then you really run the risk of having a faulty product.
Well, I know what that's like.
I know yes.
I won't go into it too much,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Maybe off the air. But we'll talk more about that. But yeah, what do you think was the strongest era of City Pages, and financially, and just for you personally too?
The strongest era?
Yeah.
I don't. It kind of went up. I mean, really, and in any business will tell you this. It goes kind of up and down with your salespeople, your sales team. Really. So it would go up and down based on the strength of the sales team. But that again, that's sort of like losing employees. That's just part of the deal. But that era, where we had the Malibu April, we were pumping out 28, 32 page papers constantly. And this was before, this was just when people really started going online for their news. And actually we rode that wave really well. I mean, we didn't really see that much of a drop that was due specifically to that. And that was one of the reasons why for so long I didn't put city pages online. Mm-hmm. It's like, why would I do that? Our circulation literally our circulation was going up while all other newspapers' circulation was going down. And for them, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's what I said.
I remember when we went to the Utah conference and people's jaws would drop when I said we didn't have a website. And I said, well, how's your revenues doing?
Exactly.
So, well, our circulation is continuing to increase. We're ahead of the daily paper in town. So tell me again, what's crazy about that?
Exactly.
And I admit when I came on board, I thought this is crazy that we don't have a website and we're not. And I do think, at some point that shift is going to, it's going to occur. I don't think just giving it away online is the key too. I mean,
no. Mm-hmm.
Really, if you wanted to create a new media environment, it'd be podcasts, it'd be YouTube videos, you'd have to incorporate all this new media into it and find a way to make revenue streams based off it. And you're going to be way more streamlined too than, most news operations are today. I actually think the direction of media is going is I really think it's going to start being journalist as entrepreneur, like you're going to be the news and you'll have like your niche that you cover and like this is what you do and people follow you and you earn money based on your own reputation and you're going to be streamlined and slick and you're probably going to have your own home office or whatever. I just don't think the idea of having like a big staff of a newspaper, like the journalism as institution, I think that ship has sailed on that model. I don't think it survives today.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take.
I don't know. That was something that I was never able to figure out or find a good answer for, which is why we didn't go online. And I think we've had we had those conversations over the years. It's like, you know what? Maybe the big guys, the New York Times, Washington Post, or Time, they can, because their market is literally the entire world. Yep. So they have, right? And so they can, if they only get $1.99 a month from from a million people, that's still they can still
a lot of revenue. Yeah.
You can't do that with this, when with a local media. That's why a lot of local news sites failed because they just the revenue just wasn't there, and that's why you have a lot of nonprofit ones coming up. But that, again, it's a matter of, well, is it going to be sustainable? And, you don't really know if something is going to be sustainable until you kind of watch it for a little while. So, yeah, that's interesting, what you had said. And then you have to wonder, too, how sustainable is that, right? Because then every journalist going to be able to make enough money, for it to be a real job, a family supporting job.
Yeah,
right?
How that work? I mean, yeah, you have to become a marketer too. You have to be able to market yourself as well as do the work. What I think when I was thinking about too is, going back, well, I've been doing this for a long time, so this model might work for me. Some of the journalists I'm following, like Glenn Greenwald, who helped Snowden break the whistleblowing, the NSA wiretapping stories. He's got his own thing going on. There's several that are doing that, but they all had training and institute. They all worked for newspapers or different media organizations. What about someone coming in fresh out of college? Like, how do they get that? Where does that experience come from before? What's the pipeline? I guess that's the part.
And that's really important. And that's really important because institutional knowledge and society is basically institutional knowledge. It's what you've passed. What you've passed along. I mean, there are you have to reinvent the wheel every time. Then.
Right.
But if you're coming down, if that pipeline exists, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Then people who have been in the business know the common mistakes, that are made, so that you don't have to make those common mistakes. They know the common tricks to do it better, right?
Right.
So if you have to reinvent the wheel every time, that's a lot of time and energy.
I mean, they're kind of doing that now anyway. I mean, when you have like a one-person newsroom and they're getting graduates fresh out of Eau Claire. Like when I started, I mean, I had one journalism class my entire college career. Everything I learned was from, I read a lot of newspapers, so I got the tone from that. And I was always in a newsroom with other reporters, so I could bounce ideas off of them. I mean, I use stuff today that I learned from Jake Rigdon, who was an investigative reporter at the Herald back when I job shadowed with him, way back then. I mean, I had people to ask and to learn from and just to observe. I listened to the way Keith Ulig would conduct an interview and how he had this kind of "aw shucks, how you doing, buddy" kind of tone. And I learned a lot from that. I learned from like Scott Williams, how he would treat people. I learned from a lot of people in the newsroom, and like, where is, I learned from you. I mean, I just wonder where that nowadays, it's like, even when they do have new people, no one has time to work with them because everyone's so swamped. Like, right. That's one of the things I really worry about in the news media.
I do too, because especially with the Gannett Gatehouse merger, and they're just so far fewer journalists working everywhere, but especially in Wisconsin now, and those things don't just pop. It would be like, for example, what if all of a sudden the medical colleges shut down? Where are we going to get doctors, right?
And what do they do? They do residencies for like 2 years before they're doctors, so they're constantly surrounded by experienced doctors learning their craft. I mean, that you can't replicate that kind of experience in a classroom. You just have to be in the newsroom environment. And I don't know what the analog to that is, but I will say WIPS has a pretty cool program where they're bringing up these high school students. And so we're going to work with a couple of these guys. WIPS has Roger Ootmeyer, I think is his last name. He was a radio broadcaster for like 40 years. So he's got lots of experience. And he's working with these two interns that are going to start writing some content for City Pages. I've been throwing in some business stories, but the cool thing is, like, it's as hands-on or off as I want. And as much as I would love to be way more hands-on, because I like that kind of stuff. I like working with new journalists, and but I don't have the time because I'm trying to run the whole thing myself.
Well, you've got right. You have to.
It's like it's come back full. It's almost like it's come back full circle, right? Like, in a way, sort of.
Well, no, that's what I really remember when I was talking about the early days, how it was like a pandemic paper. I mean, true. I mean, while I was still there when the pandemic hit, and there actually was those lockdowns, and revenue there were hardly any ads at all in the paper because there was nothing open. So
it's tough. People don't, they understand like how it affects restaurants and other stores like that. They understand that, but they don't necessarily understand the paper part. Or like, well, why don't you have more pages? Or I've had a lot of people saying like, well, how come you guys aren't doing Buzz anymore? I'm like, well, not a lot of businesses starting up. So, but when they do, I've been on them. It's become a sometimes thing instead of a every week thing. Why people ask a lot about the pay, or even the movie times, like, where's the movie times? I'm like, well, now our deadlines are 10 a.m. for most of the content. So it makes it tough, and we try to work with them, and sometimes we get it in, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we don't have the space for it, and it's a challenge.
That's funny. Even the movie times, it's like that's so easy to find online, but sometimes it's just easier to.
It's funny. I posted something on Twitter about it, and someone said, "Do people still go for the paper for their movie times?" I'm like, you would be surprised. You would be surprised. Well, it reminded me of like when I was at Gannett, every time they'd cut something, they'd say like, "Oh, people will just get the crosswords online anyway." It's like, yeah, but someone relied on that. Someone relied on the paper to get that, and now that you cut that, they see less value in your product. So if you keep cutting things out, you're losing readers every time you do that. And I've been conscious of that now, but
there's only
you
so
got
much
to do what you can do. Yeah.
This is an unusual and extraordinary time, and so things have to change extraordinarily.
Yeah,
and
I
you just
agree.
have to keep, right, and it's just about. And when I say you, I also mean me, because I was still there in the newsroom when it's you just have to keep doing the basics, still trying to cover what you've covered. That there are still some events happening and still some things that you can report in the cover in the big guide, but there's just less of that. There's no way that you could do a fine arts preview at all, because there's none of that stuff is happening, at least not, and plus they just don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the
right,
other
they
thing I was
might
gonna
even
say.
plan it, but have something lined up. But
Yeah, they're not planning things very far in advance, which no one could blame them for, but you can't really make a preview looking at the whole quarter, a third of the year, when they're really operating maybe like stuff like the Grand. I mean, I think they're going like a month out. And who can blame them for that? Of course, like it's hard to plan that far in these times when things are so uncertain. So yeah, it's definitely changed the way we think about it. And I just keep thinking, like, what can I do that no one else is going to do? And I've been trying to do as much of that as I can.
Yeah, it's been and still covering, and you still have to cover the pandemic type things. You still had to cover the election, right? And so
well, that was a struggle too. It's like, well, I kept thinking, okay, I'm getting a little sick of everything having the COVID touch to it. Like, I can't keep writing about COVID, can I? But I'm like, well, it's impacting like literally everything.
Well, now you've got the mall development, so.
Maybe not the mall development. That's the one. I actually have a cover story coming out about the mall this week with some stuff I don't think anyone's really detailed yet. And
did you see? I'm sure you did. You saw Jeff Stubbe's video.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Chuck sent that to me, along with a lot of other things. But
I still think that water slide is a great idea.
The water slide.
It totally looks like a water slide from the aerial view.
Hey, so one thing I would ask about, when you, at some point, I wouldn't say you stopped writing, but at some point you ended up having more writers handle the writing part and you doing less of that. What was it like to step away from that role? And, did you ever miss it?
Oh yeah. I missed it a lot. But, I always felt, editors still do a lot of writing themselves, because I would often, like, if there was like a hole in a story, and if you guys weren't around, I would just make the phone call, to a source. I'd say, hey, this seems, I need a little bit more information here. It really all boiled down to kind of time. As much as I'd like to do it, I knew that, okay, if I had to carve out 4 hours, even to do a little story, right? Even just to do I had to carve out 4 hours in my day. Oh my God, that's setting me back because payroll is tomorrow. I mean, honestly. So I didn't really think about how much I missed it. But what I tried to do is I just really relish the little moments where I could fill in, and do that, and talk to sources, or get, because oftentimes when people would stop me with a story idea, I would take notes, and then I would say, hey, well, and then I'd type them up for you. I'd say, here's a start, and this is what they said, this is paraphrased, and these are quotes, and call them back, but this is a good start to a story. So that was, I relished doing those things, but I always knew when I was doing them, the clock would be ticking, because I had so many other things that I had to get done too. So, and I also knew that I had, during the year, I had my certain things that I would write. Like, for example, the best of survey, August, remember going back to our conversation about August, that's a lot of words, a lot of research, a lot of like nitpicky things that you have to get right. So that was my big writing project for the year.
Reminds me, at some point I'll have to probably buy you lunch and pick your brain about best of, because they want to do they want to do some form of best of, even if we don't have a program. Like we're not going to do any magazines next year, I don't think, but
Okay.
they want to do at least some small version of it. And I'm like, I said, sure. I mean, I think I can try to put something together. Here's the thing though, everybody that knew how that was put together is not here. I had nothing to do with it.
Survey, right,
Neither,
Survey Monkey, and then how you
yeah,
get the results in.
yeah,
And now they have, well, we'll talk about this. Your listeners don't want to hear this.
yeah.
We'll talk about that. But, you know, speaking of the program though, so the program is the magazine that had the best of. It was the long name, the official name is Get With the Program, but you know, a lot
Right.
to shorten it, you know, it's the program. So make sure you save those. I think I saved most of them here at the house, but make sure that those get saved, because when you think about it, the program is it's like that year's chronicle for
Right.
Wausau, because the best of, we always talked about the major issues, the tragedies, the triumphs, and all that happened, because that's what people responded to. They give their thoughts about it. We talk
Right.
about new businesses, you know, opening, restaurants really, but also, you know, other businesses in that survey. And so that question was always designed, the questionnaire was always designed to be a historical, so that the results were a historical reference. And when you think about it, when you go back, that is, it's a very historic document, honestly, for what happened in 1995. You know, what happened in 2000. You want to find out what year was the square built, you just go back to, you know, that's a very easy way to, you know, to find it.
Yeah. So, what was it like to, I guess, what went into the decision to sell the paper, and what was that process like for you?
Well, it was kind of, it was getting to be time, because my kids were about to leave the nest. You know, Xander, my oldest, is 17. He's a senior now. Sam is in 8th grade, and it was going back to time. And said, "Talk." I was running out of time. So,
Yes.
so you know what? And it's funny, because I didn't actually necessarily pursue it, but I talked to my business partners, and I said, you know, we have got to kind of get things lined up. So, because throughout the history of City Pages, people have been interested in, you know, in buying it. And I said, so if something like that comes up, or we can start putting our feelers out, we have to have some things lined up. And it just happened to be that right around that time is when MMC reached out to us. So the timing was just perfect. And it was really, it took longer. Well, you know, MMC, they move very fast. They're so efficient with these things, but it took a little bit longer. Probably it was all my fault, because I'd be like, okay, I've got the, you know, now I've got the magazine to put up, I've got the program magazine, and then I've got the winter book to do. And so just like my life, you know, it was governed by those schedules. So it took a little bit longer. It wasn't a hard process. It took a lot of work. It was very, very time consuming. It took a lot of juice out of me. And in fact, I remember some of the staff had said, we thought something was going on, but they didn't know, you know, exactly what, or maybe they thought, you know, because I was just so distracted, because you know how it is when you're working, you get distracted by like emails that are sort of important. Well, I was getting distracted by tasks and emails and conversations that were super important, you know, to the sale. Like sometimes it came in the middle of deadline, and I was like, I can't. And then you have to be. It's not. They aren't easy questions. So that was always my life. Is, you know, it always was, you know, that business side, and then that editorial, you know, creative side. But that's what I liked about it.
Nice. I guess, was it bittersweet to say goodbye to City Pages, the paper that you founded? And
it's you know, those things are such a process that it was hard. Like I always was waiting for it to kind of sink in, and it didn't really sink in, because there was that transition period where they really you know, relied on me, and I still was honestly making a lot of decisions. Not that they forced it upon, but it was more like they just trusted, me to, make some, they're like, well, whatever you think is best,
Yeah. In the beginning, I mean, there wasn't a lot of obvious change,
no, yeah.
Now,
And
of course, it's quite different, but
well, yeah, and it wouldn't, you know what, Brian, and it would have been different if I hadn't sold. And actually, maybe, honestly, maybe it saved City Pages
might
them,
have, yeah.
right? Because they have kind of the experience and the wherewithal to do something, because they've been through closures and, acquisitions and things like that before. So they have just a lot. And that was, remember I wrote that in my farewell letter, is that now MMC provides that cushion to for City Pages to weather whatever may come. Well, we didn't know that this was going to be something that they were going to have to weather. So I guess there was not one point where it just sunk in, because it was more like gradual. Because then even when I left the office, when it sunk in is when I brought home my last things, when I was moving the desks out.
Oh yeah, I remember that
day. And because I said, you guys can keep those, because that was part of the acquisition, is that, obviously they bought everything. I said, but these desks have their antiques, and they just have, sentimental. They were a gift from a bank president and it's when the movers came, and I was physically moving my old desks and the back. That's when
does this look familiar?
Oh, good. I was wondering if they were going to keep.
I grabbed
we had a lot of those.
Yeah, I grabbed a couple of them when we moved stuff.
They're nice chairs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a lot. Yeah, because we had to shrink down quite a bit. So
yeah,
so it goes. But yeah, the new office is working out okay, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Good.
But yeah, my role is quite a bit different than yours was. I'm more of like, my title's editor, but I pretty much just manage the content,
Mm-hmm.
So I have more duties and such, but I don't really, we also have an office manager, and she does a lot of the, being in charge of the logistics part of it, I guess. So
mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so she handles employees and stuff like that. I don't really deal with that, I guess. I think they still look to me for some leadership, but I don't know, it's different, right? So I have less control. I certainly have less control, other than the content is my main area of control, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what?
I can.
That's right. That's okay. If you keep it there, then you can focus on that and do a good job, as you have been, without having to be distracted by other things.
I appreciate that. So, there's definitely things I wish could be done differently, but all you can do is all you can do.
Right. I mean, there honestly, there was hardly ever a period in City Pages where we could do everything that I wanted,
Sure.
that I wanted to do, or what my, or what my vision was, except for, I think I would say that most of our magazines, they turned out, and we were doing them as, they definitely matched, what my, ultimate, vision of them was. Well, a lot of them, they were 120 pages or more, and right. And they were beautiful and full of a lot of great things. So, so I think in those things, those projects did match it. But, you always want to do, the best and the most wonderful things. And you can only, I guess, do that within what you have control of. So many things you don't have control. When I say you, I mean universal you, we.
So whenever I have an entrepreneur on the podcast, I like to ask them about tips for young entrepreneurs. So what are some tips that you would give to young people starting out that may want to start their own businesses in one form or another?
Well, okay, so I'll give you some, and some of them don't necessarily come from me. There are tips that I'm passed along from, and in fact, I was just talking to someone about this. One of the first things is pay your freaking taxes and don't get behind, and you don't mess with that. Because if you want to get into trouble real fast, that's how you get into trouble real fast. And I keep having the image of a local shopkeeper who got into trouble that way, and the sheriffs came down and confiscated his till. So,
Nice.
so that's how big of trouble you can get into. So don't mess around with taxes. Stay on top of that. Don't skimp on your accounting and bookkeeping. I would say be realistic, because it will be the non-fun things like taxes that will trip you up.
Yeah.
That will be right, because if you whatever you're doing, you're probably doing it because you love it. There's an area that you have an interest in. Well, that's your strong part. That's your strong suit, right? You have to think about what you're weakest in, and that's really where you have to focus your attention, because entrepreneurs will naturally do those things well. The things that they love, that will naturally come. What's not so natural are the other things that will require you to be success. I think the other thing is really think about your product. And sometimes people, I used to chafe at the word product for journalism, until I was really in it. And that's really just a good way to say what's your mission without being so esoteric. But when you say product, it I don't know, there's something more real about that.
Yeah, it's a little more concrete.
Yeah. So I would say define your product and know what your product is and who you're selling it to. Even if you're not necessarily selling it, who are you selling it? Who are you selling it to? And and no matter what, you have to know how to sell it. That'd be the major thing. I always say it's sort of like smarts too. Doesn't matter what you know, doesn't matter what you have, if you can't sell it. And selling can also be convincing people. You've got to know how to get it into the hands and get people to want it. Right?
Yeah. Well, that was that's something I think a lot of creative people struggle with, is the selling it side of it. We know, creative people know what they're capable of, but they're not always so good at selling it. And I think that was one thing I really valued about my time with you, is that when I worked at Gannett, it was like, I was really the only one pushing stories, at least at the Journal at the time. I was the only one really pushing stories that were not just daily type stories, but actually had some enterprise content. So I was used to getting like, yeah, good, great, go do that. With you, I had to sell it, and I wasn't very good at that. So I had to think about it, and I had to teach myself how to get much better at selling a story so that I could actually have it be successful. Because I knew in my mind, I knew it was a good story. I have no doubt that I think there's very few times when I thought something was a good story and it turned out not to be. But can I sell that? That's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And that actually is weird, because that also is part of the editing process. For my is getting people to articulate what makes a story so great. Because if you have a hard time articulating it, then you'll have a hard time writing it. And remember what I always say is, when you guys come in to talk to me about a story, always the first things that you say will be your lead. Remember we talk and I'd say, what was the first thing you said? That's your lead.
Well, the challenge for me is that I think through writing a lot of times. So a lot of times, like, I know it's in there, but I can't quite put it to paper unless I write it out. So a lot of times when I was pitching to you, I would actually start writing it. And then that would put it in my head in a way that I could get it out. So that's a challenge when you almost think through writing, or like it's like it's in here and it will come out of my fingers. It won't necessarily come out of my mouth. So how do I flip that around? And so I would find through, at least I would write out my pitches, and by writing them out, it'd be like, okay, I can see the holes in them, or I can see how I have to switch things around and figure out a way to really make it sound like something people would understand. Yeah. Introvert problems.
Well, no, I totally get that, because I often am the same way. It's like I have a hard time maybe articulating it, and I'll say, I've got to write it down, because it's about, like you said, it's some people are just used to different pathways. Some people have a very nice pathway from their brain out their mouth, and other people's pathways are through their fingers.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of like, steering into your weaknesses and trying to turn them into strengths. I'm not a naturally good speaker, so I started a podcast.
Practice,
And
practice,
you
practice.
know what? I've gotten better. Like I can see a huge difference from my latest episodes to my early ones. I mean, I'm still not where I want to be, but I've definitely improved. So I think that I was afraid of heights, so I started climbing so I can get used to them. I'm still afraid of heights, but there's something about conquering those things. I think that's super important.
And exhilarating too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, I know you always love throughout the time that I've known you, you've always been so interested about entrepreneurism, and I think another thing, and we can end this, is something that we shared actually. Is one thing that to remember is that, and you'll recognize this, is that a great idea that's executed poorly will fail, but even a mediocre idea that's executed wonderfully will succeed. So
Yeah.
right? It's, in other words, it's all about the execution.
Yeah, when I interviewed Antonio Centeno, the guy who's behind that big YouTube channel, Real Men, Real Style, he had a little placard on his wall that said, "Ideas are nothing without execution." And I was like, yeah, I've kept that in mind because you got to be able to bring it out. And so you have to think about like, how can I do this in the most efficient way possible to still get my vision out there? Because you can't kill yourself either. I thought about this with the podcast a lot. Like, how can I do this in a way that it still looks good, but I'm not killing it myself? And when I was working with Harold, and Harold did a great job, but I feel like he tried to do it the very best way he could do it. And it took hours and hours and hours. And I said, Harold, you can't do this because at some point you're going to get busy and you won't be able to keep doing, you won't be able to keep doing it because it'll be just so much work. And I can't pay you right now. Like I hope someday I could, but today I probably could pay him a little bit, but, and again, that's what happened. He got so busy with other things. And then it was hard for him to justify spending all this free time on my podcast. And so we had to kind of part ways, but it was a perfect illustration of like, you have to think about how can I do this efficiently, but also really, really well.
Yeah, and still and still do it, and within your vision. But often, you have to. And I don't want to use the word compromise in a bad way, but you do have to make compromises, and you might, maybe your vision it's not attainable or sustainable. So, but you can probably get halfway there. Or you could do something that still is going to be fun and will, I don't know, satisfy your entrepreneurial creative spirit.
It was something that I think that was something you taught me too, is like you have to think about not just now, but you have to think about it over and over and the sustainability of something, and that I think that's where I come in with the podcast. I don't think it's how do we get this episode and make it really, really good? How can we do it in a way that's replicable, that we do this every single time this way? Right. And of course, with COVID, of course, I had to completely change that around again because thankfully Zoom has a record function and video, so that works out really well.
Right. The I remember those conversations that we would have. A lot of times people would have, great ideas, for city pages. Oh, we should do this, or we could do that, and it'd be okay. That would be good one time, but if you're going to commit to this being a regular feature, that's kind of a different beast, and that's a different story. And actually, and that's also like with just for example, social media too, right? If you're going to do a social media campaign and have a presence, you actually have to do the mundane part of scheduling it and committing to it, because otherwise, it just, things have a way of dropping off.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, good habits.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Tammy, I want to be respectful of your time. The last thing I want to talk to you about is what do you think is in the future for you? Is it kind of wide open, or do you have some ideas, or how would you characterize that?
I would characterize it as it's wide open, and I haven't thought about that. One of the reasons that I wanted to sell and have some downtime was to just work on my to be here for my home and family. That cliche, I'm stepping back spend more time with my family. That is so literally true. And especially for now, with the kids, like just the other day, they are going back to school 2 days a week. Sam got sent home with a cough. Now, I know it wasn't COVID. I shouldn't say I know, 99.99% sure it wasn't COVID. It was because he was screaming for 2 hours playing Minecraft online with his friend. It was a very wild game of Minecraft, apparently. Wow. And so, because I heard him, and I'm like, oh my God. And I know that's why he had a scratchy throat, but he got sent home anyways. So then his brother got sent home, and then we had to get them tested. So that was a full day. And I even said to my husband, like, oh my God, this would have been a nightmare if I was still working.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm so glad that I'm home. I had to replace my front steps and my porch. I'm doing, like I said, I'm full-time handyman, full-time mom, and get Xander off to on his way to college. We went through some college applications. So honestly, Brian, I mean, and when people ask me that, I swear it's like they don't believe me. They think that I'm hiding something, but I'm not. But I'm not. I feel like there's so many different things that I could do that I'm not necessarily. I'm not necessarily worried, and I am, happy doing a lot of different types of things. So, so it is totally wide open, and I'm just keeping my eye on the job market and some things that are happening, or some ideas maybe for something else, that I would start up, on my own. But I haven't really thought about what that would be. So that also is on the table, doing another type of business. I don't even know if it would be media. I really don't. I don't know.
Well, I think I speak for everyone, as we'll be really curious to see what you end up doing next, especially if it's starting something up. But I want to say congratulations on 27 years of City Pages. Like, starting a business is no small matter, and to have one run that long under your leadership, I mean, that's a testament. So.
Well, thanks. And it's possible because of great people like you and all, and smile for the camera, and you made it happen. So thanks to you for always being there, even when I was crabby, to my good times. Not
that much. Every once in a while.
Try not to swear too much. Well, it's good seeing you.
You too. So I have all my guests close the episode by saying, keep it Wausome. So keep it Wausome, Tammy.
You too. Keep it Wausome.
And keep it Wausome, everyone else. And you guys all take care. Bye-bye.